What's up, y'all? Back again. So it's been a long week, and hopefully your weekends or your weeks have been pretty good, and hopefully your weekend is even better. I know we had a windstorm yesterday, so I hopefully nobody's power is out. I guess that's it. That's been an issue today with a lot of people. I know last night at the station, there's been a lot of calls of power lines being down and everything. So hopefully everyone is safe and I guess your I guess spring break is coming up, which I didn't really know, and so I'm gonna do this lecture, and then hopefully you guys can have a good spring break, and then we'll come back next time, and then I'll hopefully have everything World War II done before you guys do potentially go on spring break. I think hopefully it isn't this weekend or this week. I think it should be next week. I think. But anyways, yeah, so I'm just gonna get all that stuff done, and then hopefully we can now start on the new age. So anything after 1950 pretty much, which we should be getting to that pretty much by tonight. And so yeah, it's just been a lot of running around today, and then but otherwise, yeah, no, we're just gonna get right into it pretty much. Hopefully hopefully the midterm is going along pretty well and everything, and then otherwise your final should be later on. I think it's like April, and so hopefully with how I have it all scheduled out, pretty much each weekend will be like a 10-year lecture. So in theory, by the end or just before the end, we should get to 1991. But I will have a few other bonus lectures in between. So just to make sure everyone is aware, after World War II, I'll be starting 1950 to 1960, but also I'll also do a lecture on genocide, and then I do have a lot of historical small artifacts that I do want to show you as well. So hopefully I can get some approval to show you guys. I will message and like email around to kind of see if I do have approval to do stuff, because some of them are weapons, and but otherwise most of it is just kind of like clothing, kind of like miscellaneous stuff here and there, pins and everything. And so hopefully I do have approval to show that stuff, but I'm gonna see what I can do, and then it should be pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool, and then hopefully it's a nice day out where I can actually do it outside, which will be a better thing. But otherwise, yeah, no. So I left off with, I believe, Normandy invasion over there, and then so the Normandy invasion. So I left off with that. The fall of Berlin and everything. So the European side is done. I do know that I left off quite a few things because there's just so much we do have to get through. But I do have a big PowerPoint on the Tuskegee Airmen, so I do need to send that. It's just a matter of just finding it. I do know it's on one of my hard drives. I just need to find the hard drive again. And I think that might be the one that actually quit out on me one night, but I have to double check. Otherwise, most of the Tuskegee Airmen mostly operated in the European theater. Most of them operated out of course, P-51s, but also they operated out of the P-47, and then the B-25, and then the P-40. And so most of them would have operated out of the P-40N, I want to say, or F series, and that's the one with the Merlin engine. And so that's the one where it was used to operate at higher altitudes, because the European theater, most of those dogfights were fought at a higher altitude. So most of the aircraft, especially from Germany, are meant for higher altitude, whereas the U.S. aircraft were meant for lower to mid coastal altitudes. Especially, Britain also used for higher altitude as well. So once America gets into the air war with Europe, they start to discover that, we need to actually figure out a way to operate at higher altitudes and stuff. So then with the introduction, of course, the B-17, so B-29, I'll get to that later on, but the B-29 is the first, I believe it's the first pressurized aircraft to come out of World War II. But most of the time, most of those aircraft will be operating unpressurized, and it's just there you go. But otherwise, yeah. So there's a lot of other things, and I believe out of all the Tuskegee Airmen, I think there's like I want to say it's like 350 or so actually made it overseas, but then about half of them end up becoming casualties of war, whether it's POWs or actually killed in action. But I'll have more information about that later on, because there's just so much we have to get through. And so I'll send you a bunch of info on that too when I find that PowerPoint that I have. But yeah, I left off with the Battle of the Coral Sea, where we pretty much eliminated their whole entire. Well, actually no, I left off with yes, I did. No, Solomon Islands. Sorry. So Midway. Oh my gosh, yeah. So I left off with Coral Sea and then Midway. Now, Japan. So by this point, Battle of Coral Sea and Midway, we pretty much eliminated most of their naval aircraft or naval aircraft carriers. Now, we completely thwarted their plan of attacking or invading Australia, but they want to make another go at it. So they try to invade Papua New Guinea again, and this time the Australian forces and the U.S. actually forced them back to Ghana and Buna. After that, that was pretty much a done deal. Now, the Battle of Guadalcanal starts that following month, August 7th. That's when this is kind of like, well, it's kind of also mentioned as like the Eastern Solomon Islands campaign, but it's essentially the first Allied offensive against Japan. Now, at this point, Japan is on the offensive, and now we're just like, all right, it's go time. So my cat, and so now we invade. Well, we go into Guadalcanal, and we try to push Japan out of it. Now, this essentially halted this battle. Now, kind of like, this is the one that culminates in, if we lose Japanese, or we lose against the Japanese in terms of their expansion into the Pacific. If we win, we halt their advance. Now, Battle of Henderson Field. Now, that one is a Japanese counterattack that ended in a failure. And the Allies, they kept the field from falling back into Japanese hands, and then that later on, the next day actually, was the Battle of Savo Island. The Japanese, they end up making some progress. So this is coming right off the coast. So this whole battle culminates in both a land battle and a sea battle, okay? So Savo Island. Japan, they end up sinking 4 Allied cruisers. I believe it's the Canberra, Vincennes, and the Astoria, and the Quincy. Now, later on that same month, got something in my eye. Later on that same month, the Saratoga and the USS Enterprise, they sight a Japanese carrier in the Eastern Solomons. So they dispatch an aircraft, and then they go up, they find that carrier, and so they sink it. It's the Imperial Japanese Naval Ryujo. And now, so later on, they just keep pushing back the Japanese and pushing them back. Now, there's a naval campaign that occurred during that battle, and then it became a major victory for the Allies. And this essentially prevented the Japanese from pushing reinforcements into that island. And essentially it just halted everything altogether. So now we're pushing. So now we end up pushing. There we go. So we end up pushing the Japanese back into like that Indonesia and kind of Philippines area. Now, by 43, Guadalcanal ends up becoming a success, and it becomes a major Allied victory, and the U.S. take control of the island. And by this time, Japan loses New Guinea, and then the U.S. and Australian forces pretty much have complete control over that area. Now, later on in the spring, the Battle of Bismarck Sea happens. And so this was supposed to be a counterattack to reinforce the troops. And Japan needed to send a fleet of about like 7,000 troops into New Guinea. So they're trying again. Now, U.S., they have a torpedo group of SBD, no, not the SBD, TBD Devastators. And they're sent out to attack this troop transport. And Japan ends up losing four destroyers and 8 of its transports. It's a major loss. And this was supposed to be one of the biggest invasions that Japan has ever conducted. But now, because of this major loss and the amount of people they end up losing, Japan ended up having to be pulled back. And essentially, now what? They don't have an invasion force. Their force is completely eliminated. And they will never, up until pretty much, well, from there on out, that was the last time Japan has ever conducted an attempt at a major invasion. Completely thwarted. They never do it ever again. Now, at the same time, the U.S. Army Air Forces and the Australian Royal Air Force, they end up decimating like pretty much a 16-ship supply convoy to reinforce New Guinea through like low-level bombing and then skip bombing. So skip bombing is a new, kind of like a new tactic that they use where they take either a Liberator, I believe it's the Liberator at the time, they used the Liberator to do this, but essentially they'll come in at semi-low altitude, then they'll drop kind of like a bomb that looks like kind of like a barrel, and then it would spin. So I believe it would spin backwards, and yeah, I think it'll spin backwards. So that way, when it hits the water, it skips, and it keeps skipping. And then actually, it was fairly accurate, and they would hit the ships from the side. So they conducted that with major success. And then late March, like March 26th, the Aleutian Islands. So that is up here in Alaska. There we go. So that's up here in Alaska. It's this island chain that's to the south. And this was essentially just a stalemate because... where is it? Yeah, there we go. It was a stalemate because just weather conditions were horrendous. Now, initially, there was a naval battle off the coast, and it ends on pretty much just both sides essentially just stop, but it forces Japan to retreat from the islands. And on top of the islands, there was just a major bloodbath, but also a lot of death due to the harsh winter, the cold, and then also just essentially just brutal fighting. And I believe by the end of it, by the end of the battle, I believe it was a last-ditch effort by the Japanese to make a push in the Aleutian Islands. And they did this massive bonsai charge where I think it's like 3,000 or 4,000 soldiers ended up trying to charge, and they all got completely destroyed. And I believe not even a fraction of them ended up getting taken prisoner. I think they all passed away. I'm pretty sure. But don't quote me on that one. But essentially, yeah. So Aleutian Islands, Japanese lose that. So now they're pushed out of there. And then off the coast of the Aleutian Islands in the northern Pacific Ocean, they get pushed out of there as well. Now, August of that following year as well. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So at the same time, yeah. Yeah. So August of 43. New Georgia and the Solomon Islands, they're both captured by the U.S. and then they forced the Japanese to completely retreat from Guadalcanal, pretty much completely. So now they're just completely back here. They're not going to be touching the coast of Australia ever. And so now we're just mowing them down left and right. We're just taking territory left and right. And so the Battle of Kula Gulf, July 6th, Japanese try to land more troops on the eastern part of the Solomon Islands, but then 2 destroyers and 2 cruisers ended up being sunk. except for one U.S. destroyer or cruiser. They ended up sinking that one, the USS Helena. She got sunk by 3 torpedoes. But then, later on, the Battle of Vila Gulf, that was the first time U.S. destroyers acted independently. Now, they caught wind that 4 Japanese destroyers were arriving at night to reinforce the Japanese troops at Kalamam Bangara. Now, 6 U.S. destroyers ended up waiting for them, and they closed in on the Japanese force using radar, and we were in complete radio silence at that time. And then once they got as close to them as possible, so this was like the dead of night as well. He got as close to them as possible, and then at the last second, they opened fire, completely destroying this entire task force. And now, we're going to get to a few other battles that are fairly well known, and I believe if anyone has seen the Pacific, they will know about these battles, especially Guadalcanal, but also a few other ones. Now, this is where we get into kind of like that final push into everything. So, the invasion of Peleliu. Now, Major General William Rupertus, he said the 1st Marines will take the island in 4 days with 17,500 Marines. And then the 81st Infantry had about 11,000 men as well. 4 days. Well, that was not the case, essentially. So, Japan, they waited until like all the LVTs, so like the landing craft, essentially, they hit the shore. There's like 60 of them. They all hit the shore, and then the Marines got on the island, and there was just nothing. Everything was just kind of like, wait, what's going on? And then, not a second later, all the defenders opened. So they had these hidden steel doors. They opened the steel doors and just like completely opened fire on them at point blank range. And so the Marines were caught in this like crossfire because they had steel doors marked out everywhere. And so Marines were just getting killed left and right. The 5th Marines ended up pushing to an airfield, and then Japanese tanks ended up going to that airfield as well, and defending that. The U.S. responded by taking in more tanks, and then they had a naval battery off the coast that started shooting. They had airstrikes, and they were just sending everything at this island left and right. They were completely leveling the whole entire island. On the day 1, 24 hours, 1,100 of those people ended up passing away. So there was a bunch of F4U Corsairs, or the I believe the Whistling Death is what they call it. And so F4U Corsairs, they come in and they start landing at this airfield that 1,100 people died trying to take. Now, from there, they ended up conducting dive bomb missions on the rest of the island that was still taken over by the Japanese. Then the Japanese were pushed to this place called the Point, and so the Point was just this large fortification that was that caused just a large amount of casualties. It was hell on earth trying to take this point, and after it was taken, it was called Bloody Nose Ridge. So that was where the 1st Marines... Oh, shoot. So here's how it is, essentially. Oh. Sharonville. Cottingham. Someone got a hand injury from a fall. So Bloody Nose Ridge. So there's this ridge. So yeah. So, now, I gotta use another marker. So essentially, the 1st Marines, they tried to push up against this ridge but there was a bunch of Japanese snipers that were at the top of them. So the snipers just they pinned them down, but they kept picking off each and every single one of those Marines. And so they were just getting hammered at the base of this ridge. Here's my sad drawing of a bunch of 1st Marines trying to take this ridge. Alright. And so now... There we go. Sorry. I'm so sorry about this. This is horrible. So, they're trying to storm up this ridge, but... Of course, there's Japanese snipers that are in these trees that are trying to fire down on these people, and so they got them pinned down. And now, as they pushed up, hand-to-hand combat ensued. So now they're kind of like intermingled in this mess on this ridge. All right, and so now. By this time, how many Marines do you think were left? Not a lot. So out of the hundreds that were, or thousands actually, out of about 3,000 Marines, less than 2,000 were left. And then out of the 300 that were trying to take the battalion, only 9 were left out of this whole entire group. And so this ridge was horrible. And essentially, the 81st Infantry, they lost so many people, but the 1st Marines ended up reinforcing them eventually. And, well, they actually replaced some of those elements. So they ended up not really reinforcing them, but just replacing what they lost. So I guess you could call that reinforcements. And so, they held out there, and then... In the midst of all this going on, this is where we get to the major plan for the rest of the war. So October, so this all happened in, what was that, November? No, March. April, May, no. Whoa, I am getting my months mixed up. September, sorry. September into October. So October comes along. Nimitz and MacArthur, they come up with a 2-pronged strategy. So, I'm going to just put it down here. So essentially, this is what their plan was. Sick. Alright, so essentially, it's a 2-pronged strategy. Nimitz. So Nimitz is the admiral or the commander of the Allied naval forces. He's going to island hop. So he's going to go to the Marshall Islands, and then he's going to push all the way up until Japan. But then, at the same time, so he's going to go through the Philippine Sea, Marshall Islands, Caroline, Mariana, Gilbert Islands, Central Pacific, and stuff like that. And so, at the same time, though, he's also going to conduct an invasion of Tarawa by the Marines, and then, of course, Macon, so by the Army. At the same time, MacArthur, he's going to take over the southwestern campaign, and he's going to go island hop along there. So he's going to invade the Philippines, especially because that's the one where I believe he famously said, "I left but I shall return," or something like that. And so he's going to attack places like, of course, New Guinea, Western Solomons, the Philippines especially, and then New Britain. So I'm going to write that down for you guys. So in order. West Solomons, Meccan, New Guinea, Guinea, and Philippines. Oh, spelled that wrong. There we go. And then cool Marshall. Gilbert Islands, Caroline, Mariana, and then see, then there you go. So essentially, these are the places that they're going to try and take over. Feel free to screenshot and stuff. Add that. So essentially, so where is it? Marshall. So Nimitz, he's going to pretty much go here and then curve up through the Mariana into northern Pacific. At the same time, MacArthur's going to island hop, so he's going to go into the West Solomons, into New Guinea, and then go up into pretty much like the Malaysia, Philippines area, and then push into. So they're going to pretty much curve around, and they're going to essentially meet up outside of Japan. That's the basic gist of it. So that was a plan. It's all in motion. Now, November 20th was an assault on Tarawa first. Now, Tarawa, Nimitz begins his push towards the Gilbert Islands by essentially taking over Tarawa at a tiny atoll. So that is Tarawa. And there is a major airfield there. If he takes that airfield, they're that much closer to where they can conduct operations against occupied China and also Japan and or actually push them out. Now, he chooses to do a frontal amphibious assault on it, and it's only like a 2-mile long, kind of like 800-meter wide speck of land, essentially. And so the Japanese Rear Admiral, Kaiji Shibazuki, he says it would take 1,000,000 years before anyone could take this island. So he has this island reinforced to the neck for Japanese soldiers. And he's like, no one is leaving this place alive. Everyone is dying. Everyone's staying. Everyone's dying. Whether we like it or not, we're defending this place. So that's his thing. And so America steps in. They use 17 aircraft carriers. They use 17 aircraft carriers, 12 battleships, 66 destroyers, 36 transports, and they all make up the 2nd Marine Division in the 27th Infantry Division. Totaling about 30,000 U.S. troops and everything versus about 3,000 Japanese defenders are on this island. That's a crap ton of people. The Japanese, they of course incorporated other people like Korean laborers and Japanese laborers. It was about 1,000 of each. And then they have like 40 artillery batteries accompanied by like 500 barriers on this island. This place, and 14 coastal guns. This place is loaded, literally. Now, the minute they step on land, this is like the Normandy of the Pacific. It's a complete bloodbath. As soon as the Higgin boats just open up, artillery and machine gun fire open up, and then about 1,500 men die before the whole 5,000 of them can actually assault this place. And so by this time, there's also naval issues now because there's Japanese torpedo boats that are out there. And so the USS Linsum Bay, believe that one ends up being sunk by a submarine. And then in total, out of the whole entire time, about 3,500 Marines end up being killed versus about 4,500 Japanese soldiers. So pretty much all the Japanese soldiers were just annihilated. And I think I posted a bunch of a bunch of footage of the attack on the modules page. It's super gruesome because this is the first attack that was ever recorded where the enemy and the the allies and the Axis were like within the same frame shooting at each other. The combat was that close at the whole entire time. And so at the same time, though, when you go back to, I believe, the Bloody Nose Ridge, finally it gets taken after about, what, a month or so, or 2 months? Yeah, about 2 months. Ends up getting taken. November 27th, the U.S. finally take it. And so Nakagawa, who was in charge of that, he ends up committing ritual suicide the minute he loses that ridge. The 1st Marines, by the end of it, lose about 6,500 people. And that was in like literally a month period of time. The 81st Infantry ended up losing another 3,300, but out of that, 10,500 or so Japanese ended up dying. Crazy. And so a division of Japanese troops ended up staying in the caves until about 1947, actually. They just stayed down there. And then the admiral ended up coming back and convincing them that, hey, the war's over, we lost, sorry, you can come out now. And so the 1st Marines, because they lost so many casualties, I keep doing this, but the 1st Marines, they ended up losing so many casualties that by the end, they don't recover till the end of the war, essentially. And so that's where we get to 1944. And so at the same time, well, just before this, just before the Normandy invasion, Japan, so the winter of 1944, the two islands fall to the U.S. and the Marshall Islands end up being taken. Nimitz is just dominating. And so I think Roy Namar and Kwajalein, they end up falling to the U.S. February through March, MacArthur ends up taking control of the Admiralty Islands. And then by June, that's when they're pretty much pushed back to pretty much... So the Japanese, they're pretty much pushed back to now here. So they're now just holding out. And so the siege of mainland Japan begins. Complete blockade of the island. We now develop the B-29. The B-29 is getting sent out as on strategic bombing missions. And essentially, we just laid waste to the mainland. And so the U.S., they invade Saipan. They end up taking it. The Battle of the Philippine Sea ends up happening in that June. So definitely remember the Battle of the Philippine Sea because of Philippine Sea. Because this is going to be known as a different term. So, at this time, Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher. So, he went up against the Japanese Vice Admiral Izaburo Ozawa. So, his idea was to take control of the area, controlling Saipan and the waters just south of Iwo Jima and the Bonin Islands. So if he were to control the sea, essentially the U.S. has free reign to send troops, send supplies to these islands if they were to capture it. And so, because of the fact that earlier on during Midway, Japan lost a lot of its what's that word I'm trying to say? A lot of its experienced personnel. Now, when it comes to the U.S. had this a rule where after so many periods of time, the pilots will be cycled. Oh my, what the hell are you doing, man? What the hell? Get out of here. Get out of here. What are you doing? What are you doing? Oh my gosh. And so, oh, there you go. Yeah. He's just gonna rest next to the computer. So, because the U.S. is cycling out all of its major more experienced pilots, those experienced pilots can train more pilots and send them back in, but also they keep them fresh. And so, the pilots that are on rotation, they can now go back home, refresh, but they also don't have to experience battle to where, in terms of the Japanese keep their experienced pilots in the war. So they have a higher casualty rate of more experienced pilots. So now by this time, they have none left. Whereas, Britain and the U.S. and Australia and all them, they have pilots to spare back home who are more than capable of handling these situations. What are you doing? These situations. And so this essentially gets called the Battle of the Philippine Sea. I know some of you may actually know this term. Hold on, turkey shoots. So, it is called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. There you go. Yeah. Here we go. So, out of the fact that only 9 to 11 F6F Hellcats, so it's an upgraded version of the F4F Wildcat. The F6F Hellcat ends up becoming pretty much the main fighter of the U.S. to combat the the Type 00, of course, like A6M2 and so when they send those up, it's pretty much even ground at this point. The U.S. with 9 to 11 of these fighters end up taking out around 50 Japanese fighters, and within a 24-hour period. And so, by the end of the whole battle, about 75 to about 350, 400. It depends on the source that you use. About 75, I would say 75 at most. Japanese aircraft ended up being lost or shot down, especially during this whole battle with anti-aircraft fire and stuff like that. So I would say about 75 or so were shot down. And so out of the Japanese task force, Ozawa's Taiho, which was his flagship, that ends up being sunk. The carrier Shukaku, which was present at the Pearl Harbor attack, that ends up being sunk by submarine torpedo. And then, it stayed afloat for a little bit of time. Then ultimately, the fire spread inside the aircraft carrier, and it ends up being shut. It ends up exploding. Lieutenant Ziggy, so Lieutenant Ziegel Neff, he was a Southern pilot actually, so from Mississippi, and so he actually mentioned that he actually coined the term because essentially after the whole battle was done, he was like, it was just like an old-fashioned turkey shoot. So that's where they coined the term Mariana's Turkey Shoot, was actually from Ziggy. So, give Ziggy some props, because without Ziggy, we wouldn't have a turkey shoot. Now, the next month, U.S. Marines, they invade Guam and Tinian. And so, Guam became a major airfield for B-29s to now do operations against Japan. 20 landing craft ended up being destroyed by Japanese defenders before the Marines actually followed by the Army, who ended up taking the island by nightfall, essentially. And when they got on the island, the civilians on the island thought that the U.S. was going to rape and kill them and stuff like that. So the civilians actually ended up committing suicide initially when the Allies first captured the island. So they had to go on the intercoms and actually go out and try to save these civilians who tried to kill themselves. And so now there's a counterattack that happens soon after that when their guard was down. So General Takeshi Shina, yeah, he sent 19,000 troops, and they were all like just completely hammered on sake. They were like, we just got to get this over with. They attacked the American lines head on. Hand-to-hand combat ensued, and the Japanese end up actually breaking through the American line. And by the end of it, there was so much carnage that you had like Japanese and U.S. Servicemen just completely on top of each other. Some dead, some not, and everything. And then there was so much loss that the Japanese ended up having to retreat into the mountains of Guam. And basically they resorted to guerrilla warfare, and then there were some ambushes here and there, but essentially that was pretty much it. They resulted in small arms fire here and there. There's this guy actually on that island. You guys can look it up. This was, I believe, the last Japanese defender of the war. And he was a sergeant, actually. He ended up staying on that island in hiding, actually, till 1972. And there was no radio communication, nothing. He didn't even know that that we bombed Japan with at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He had no idea about any of that, and he just stayed defending. He relied on fish and fruits and stuff like that, and coconuts, and he stayed on that island, just wondering if they're going to reinforce them. And essentially Japan ended up surrendering out in someone else is messaging me, in October. Oh, look at little paws, little beans. So then Nimitz now wanted to capture Formosa. That was October 17th. He wanted to capture Formosa. And MacArthur, he wanted the Philippines, because it was pretty much easier to defend, essentially. And so by doing so, it would eliminate Japanese communication and logistics and reinforcement, and it gave the American people, he gave the American people his word that he was going to come back and take it. And so FDR approved it, and Nimitz and Marshall went ahead and agreed to that as well. And so now Admiral Bull Halsey Jr., he's in charge of the 3rd Fleet Task Force, Task Force 38, which is what it's called. And it was outlined with 17 aircraft carriers, 8 light cruisers, and roughly 40 destroyers or something like that. And about 6 battleships, including the USS Missouri, which this was her maiden voyage. This was her first battle. Her baptism by fire was this. And so the 7th Fleet for the Japanese, they ended up supporting the amphibious landings while the 7th Fleet under Vice Admiral Kincaid, he ended up supporting the landing while Halsey supported the operations above Kincaid. So now there was no so essentially there's not so much communication. The fleet was pretty much left to its own command, essentially. And Halsey wanted to secure air supremacy first, and then put pressure on the Japanese, and then, when the opportunity presents itself, go get them. And so, there comes Leyte. So, Leyte ends up being invaded. And so now, I'm going to get this plane. So that is just the Gulf off of the Philippines. And so MacArthur arrived on the beaches of the Philippines with 17 or 7,000 ships under the 7th Fleet and proclaimed he has returned as liberator of their country. He is the savior. And so then he comes in, and then Admiral Suimo's Toyota, he ends up trying to lure away the Task Force 38 and remove air cover from the 7th Fleet. And then he has about 3 naval forces from the north and the west, and then the south coverage on the 7th Fleet. The plan was called Show 1. So then now, here comes, let's see here. Okay. I'm gonna see if I can draw this. Gonna need my red marker now. Blue. So here's Japan. So Taiwan. Yeah. Philippines. New Guinea. Philippines. Japan. Taiwan. And then Philippines Sea. Alright, so I'm going to try to draw this all out for you guys. Halsey, so task 38. So task 438 Bull Halsey. Okay, so task 38, he's up there. And then you got north, west. So you got eight, then all right. Okay. Trying to see here. Let's see. All right, sick. So at this time, because the Japanese have lost so many troops and everything, that's when they end up getting tasked with. Well, no. So they met with the War Council, and then they came up with this plan to use their own pilots or their own planes to crash into ships. And so they called this the kamikaze, or I believe divine wind, because essentially they named this after. I want to say it was during. Oh shoot, what's that game? Oh yeah, during the invasion of Tsushima, with the Mongols, there was a major storm that decimated their navy. So it was kind of like a last. This was they were going up a major force, and due to divine intervention, they ended up surviving, and through their own like sacrifice and everything. So, or they ended up winning, and so they named these guys the kamikazes. And so they would take these planes, or they were actually there's planes, and then there's also this kind of like rocket torpedo thing where they attached it to the bottom of a bomber, and then they would detach it. They would actually weld the pilot in so he can't get out. They would detach it, then a rocket which would erupt, and then they would send that plane into, or pretty much just a missile, send that missile into a ship, or they would have a submarine that was filled to the brim with torpedoes. They would send that in, and then at the last, that would ram a ship and then explode. And so they had a bunch of different types of kamikazes, but the ones that I'm going to be talking about are mostly planes, essentially. And so, yeah. So now, here's where we get to Battle of Leyte Gulf. So Battle of Leyte Gulf is essentially the largest. What? So essentially, it is the largest naval battle in history, and so, what the? Oh, the cat. No. So the largest naval battle in history by this point, and gotta go all the way down. Yeah, there we go. And so, where is it? There we go. So now there's gonna be like 4 different engagements that occurs here. And so now it's gonna be one's at the Battle of Shibuyan Sea, and 2 U.S. submarines were found by Kirida's Central Force, and then they sunk 2 of his heavy cruisers, alerting the American fleet that, hey, there's a Japanese fleet here. Now, it's game on. So then the Americans now sail towards the Japanese, planning to meet them on equal footing. Kirida, he sends an air attack to the left, that left the light carrier Princeton in complete flames. The USS Birmingham ended up being under attack while fighting those flames. And so then, essentially, so American forces, they end up fighting back against Kirita's fleet. And which fleet was that? I'm going to see if I can see his fleets. Show one, yeah, something, yeah, that's, I got that. Alright, so Shima to the west. Okay, so there's to the west. Shima. Try to write all these names down for you guys. And then I assume this is Kirita now. Alright, cool. So here you go. Essentially, this is what it ended up looking like, essentially. No, I know it's not exactly the same, but it's fairly enough. And so, Essentially, they have Shima to the west, and then Ozawa to the north, and then Kirita to the south. And so Kirita, of course, he sent the president up in flames, and then he started attacking the Birmingham, and then um, so then he moves up. Yeah, let's stick this back here. There we go. All right, so then. Kirita ends up moving up to reinforce Shima with his fleet. Alright. So he goes up there. So now all this is open. Kincaid starts pushing. And so essentially this was an attempt to pull Bull Halsey's force away from Kincaid. And then he actually takes the bait. And so by this time Ozawa set up 78 carrier-based fighters and dive bombers, and then he launched an attack. And then these attackers were met by the Task 38 troops. So then there's a major air battle that goes on up here, and so Halsey gets pulled away, and he meets Ozawa now. And so Halsey at this point, he can either A, divide his force in half and face Ozawa, and then defend against any possible counterattack by Kirita down here, who had now, well, he's about right here, so he's out more so west. Or he can ignore Ozawa and go ahead and face him completely, or like Kirita completely, or essentially, yeah, so there you go. But then Halsey chose the latter, and so Halsey pretty much moved up and he faced him completely. So he left Kincaid without any kind of air support. So now Halsey's now up here and attacking, and then at night Nishimura, he encountered the 7th Fleet. So he's pushing forward, and then by this time, now it kind of looks like this. Ugh. I gotta erase everything. Oh no, my blue marker's gone. Alright. Ugh. Green it is. Kincaid. And so cool. Oh. There we go. More so down here. So now there's another story that comes out of here, where it's a very, very moving story, and it's about the tin can sailors, I believe. So it's Taffy 123. Who's on actually? Who's on? Okay. So I'm gonna erase this then. Shima, Kirita, Kincaid. Okay. So Shima, Kirita, and then Kincaid. Now, Bull Halsey and Ozawa meet up here, out towards Luzon. So yeah, now it essentially looks like this. So now they separated the American forces now. So they did their job. But at night, Nishimura encountered that 7th Fleet just south of Leyte, and the Japanese encountered severe losses, and Nishimura ends up dying. And so now, Shima's fleet, they arrive too late, and then they end up just retreating. So, Shima is now out of the game. There we go. So now, Kirita and Ozawa are left. Now, at Cape Inganau, Halsey attacked. Was it? Yeah, Halsey attacked Ozawa just outside of Luzon, and Ozawa's fleet lost 4 aircraft carriers, and then one carrier actually being the Zuikaku. Actually being the Zuikaku. And then that was actually one of the last carriers to attack Pearl Harbor, which is now sunk. So all the carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor are now at the bottom of the sea. And Kinkaid then sends word to Halsey that, yo, I need help. There's 4 Japanese battleships and 8 cruisers and 11 destroyers, and they're all firing on our task force. So now Laffy 1, 2, 3. They were a pair of 3 destroyers, Fletcher class destroyers. So light carrier USS Gambier Bay was part of it, but then also the USS Hull, the USS Johnston, and the USS Samuel B. Roberts, which actually it's a Butler class destroyer. Sorry. And so the destroyers actually defend. It's actually more so like this, I would say. Yeah, and then Kinkaid down here, and then Kinkaid. There you go. So that's kind of essentially what they were like. They were in between Kirita and Kinkaid. So they were actually defending the amphibious force from the Japanese task force. They were completely outnumbered, completely outgunned, but they put up a fight. So this was all in order to defend the Gambier Bay, which was one of their aircraft carriers. Now, the St. Lo and her task force, they were attempting to protect Laffy 1, 2, 3, when essentially it was engaged by an aerial onslaught by the Shikishima Special Attack Unit, which was essentially the kamikaze. So, the Gambier Bay or the St. Lo was completely just ran down by all these kamikazes, and just plane after plane just started trying to hit this aircraft carrier or hit the ship. And then essentially 1-0 flown by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, he targeted the light carrier finally. And then on the horizon, so this damaged plane looked like it was coming in straight at the aircraft carrier, looking like it was about to land. Well, no one can tell what it was because it was from the front. They couldn't see what was. They couldn't see the tail number. They couldn't see the insignias on the side, the red circles. They couldn't see it. And so, as the plane was coming in, it leveled off. Then all of a sudden, it just dove, and then the plane ended up at the same time it dove. It released a bomb, and the aircraft ended up crashing through the deck. So then the bomb went through the deck and then into the hangar where all the planes were, fuel, ammo, everything, and then it exploded. And so then the second explosion from the plane itself, it erupted and then actually hit the torpedo and bomb magazine of the ship, which caused the carrier's elevator to skyrocket hundreds of feet into the air. Not great, but then there's this extraordinary picture that you can find on Google of the aircraft carrier exploding. And then about 30 minutes later, the aircraft carrier ended up sinking, actually. And so ultimately, all three of Laffy 1, 2, 3, all three of those destroyers actually ended up sinking, and but they managed to cause tremendous damage to three of those Japanese cruisers. So you can actually look up. There's a book called Battle of Tin Can Sailors. A phenomenal book, by the way. Um, oh, I've got another one. Wow, there's so many emergencies at this place. Oh, Sharonville. And so, yeah, definitely look at the book. Great book and everything. Kirita, he knocked out Laffy 1, 2, 3. So now they're gone. So Kirita ended up deciding to stay in the area and then try to improve any of the disastrous stuff that occurred. So he's left open to attack by Halsey's task force, and then Kincaid's aerial assault. And so, by the time that the task force arrived, Kirita already retreated out of there, and Ozawa ends up just completely being decimated. And so this ends up culminating in essentially the loss of the entire Japanese Navy. And so this was the end of it. So by the end of everything, the Third Fleet ended up losing one light carrier and 18 planes. The Seventh Fleet, three escorts, two escort carriers, two destroyers, one destroyer, one torpedo boat. And then Vice Admiral Kirita's task force ended up losing the Musashi, the IGN Musashi, which is a famous, I believe it's one of the sister ships to the Yamato. And then 19 torpedoes and 17 bombs ended up hitting her and sinking her. The Yamato was damaged. It was at that battle, and the Yamato was only damaged. But he ended up losing 5 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, and 3 destroyers. Vice Admiral Nishimura, in his task force, he ended up losing 2 battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, and 3 destroyers. And the Vice Admiral Shima's reinforcement force, who retreated, he ended up losing just a light carrier and 2 destroyers. But essentially, Japan does not have the resources to keep up developing another large-scale navy such as this at this time. And then Ozawa, at the same time, he lost another carrier, an additional 3 light carriers, 1 light cruiser, and 2 destroyers. And so, by that time, 1945 comes around, the liberation of Mindanao comes along. That is the Battle of Manila. And this, I believe, might have been the first introduction to urban combat. And so, at the Battle of Manila, Japan actually occupied Manila and declared it a Japanese controlled city and a stronghold. And so, Japan ended up ransacking the city and fortified it and everything, just waiting for those American troops to come. American and Filipino forces end up marching in and engaging in an urban battle. It's the first one ever against the Japanese troops. Tanks were used to clear out these entryways, and airstrikes were completely dangerous because it was literally like right on top of each other. They could not do controlled airstrikes because it would have been friendly fire, so it was very dangerous to do so. And so there was no defining area to distinguish the coordinates for any kind of close air support. And so this was considered actually one of the most destructive urban battles in history. Over 100,000 civilians ended up dying in this battle, and over 1,000 U.S. casualties in order to just take this city. So now they finally took it, and they're finally now at Japan's doorstep. Where is it? Oh my gosh! Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, hold on. Cool. So then Operation Downfall the invasion of Japan happens. So Japan is pushed out of southeast China by this point. So now China's regained Philippines, and then most of the Marshall Islands into the Mariana Islands, and then Guam, and then all this Manila, all this is taken back. And so Burma ends up being retaken. About 600,000 soldiers comprised of British, Indian, and African soldiers ended up taking back Rangoon, which was the capital. And now all Japan now has is Manchuria, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, and Korea. Japanese naval forces were all destroyed. The Japanese Naval Air Force was conducted mainly from Army airfields because they do not have carriers to take off from. Japanese Air Forces, they had mostly like new pilots due to increased pressure and the need for new pilots as the veterans were all pretty much dead. And so Operation Iceberg. Now, Operation Iceberg was essentially this is pretty much the whole entire from January to June. Ryuko's islands were now under siege. So now these carrier-based aircraft conducted bombing runs on these islands, and they were eventually ended up being captured. Sakishima Islands, Amami Islands, Takara, Asumi, all under American domain. Everything is being captured. So now it's just like island hopping left and right. Now, February 19th to March 17th, Iwo Jima happens. We're shelling the island left and right. 60,000 U.S. troops are conducted are gathered for an invasion of this island. 21,000 Japanese troops ended up fortifying this island. They will not give this up. They essentially going to completely stick to defensive tactics only. They are not to make any offensive strategies. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, he understood that the inevitable, essentially, is that the fall of Japan is to happen, and they cannot let this island fall into American hands. If they do, then it means the fall of Japan, and that means the end of the war. And so they will fight till the last man under his command. Now, Iwo Jima was made up of a tunnel system. So essentially it was made up of this large, kind of like mound or mountain, and then a bunch of flat land. So this tunnel system essentially just went all over. There you go. Cool. Kind of like that. It's kind of looks like I don't even know what it looks like, but essentially it looks like a bunch of veins. But yeah, that's essentially what it was. It was just a large tunnel network throughout this whole entire island, from the mountain up to the bottom. And 21,000 U.S. or Japanese troops ended up occupying this whole entire island. And so Admiral Spruance, he carried out the amphibious landings, and there's a 3-day shore bombardment where they left nothing untouched. And so they completely leveled the whole entire island. And then so at 9 a.m., the assault happened. And so as soon as they started the assault, artillery opened fire. And so there's major casualties. And then from Mount Suribachi, gunfire started erupting as well, and then it was just non-stop artillery bombardment. So they were not letting up. They were not going to let this thing go into Allied hands. The Marines ended up being bogged down on the beach shore because the sand was so deep, and then there was so much fire going on, and that essentially they could not lift their heads up without being shot. And so at the same time, by nightfall, with half the amphibians landing forces on the island and half of them off the shore, now almost 50% of the fighting force is now on this island, but at the same time 50% was not. And now kamikaze attacks started coming in at night, and they started coming in from the island. And so now the light carrier Saratoga was damaged and had to pull out of the battle. So by February 21st, Mount Suribachi was completely cut off. The Allies completely took the mainland island, and now Suribachi was the only one that was there. And so the southern airfield was taken, so now we have an airfield to conduct essentially bombing runs on this island. And so by the time we took this whole entire island, about 7,000 Marines ended up laying dead on this island now. And so that spring was a major so that spring, after we ended up taking this island, March 9th to 10th, an air offensive on Japan ends up happening. And so B-29s end up conducting air raids on Japan. But the thing about Japan is that the construction. So all these houses are made of both paper and, paper and wood, fabric and wood, which makes for fuel for a fire. So now the B-29s, they dropped incendiary bombs, and guess what? We have now fuel. We have bombs that produce the fire, and then that creates a firestorm. So now we have a fire bombing in Japan's cities like Tokyo and places like that. And so now we created new bombs, though. So there's a new one called white phosphorus, which burns very hot and very, very fast. And then we also have napalm. And napalm is like this gelatin kind of material that it sticks to you. It burns and sticks to you. And so 20% of Japan is completely burned to the ground. And 20 million people are left homeless. 66 cities are in ruins. About 400,000 people are now dead. And so 20 square miles of Tokyo is completely wiped off the face of the earth. By April 1st till June 21st, Okinawa is then invaded. So Okinawa was basically the last island before Japan. And so now we're looking at the Allies are now just right off the coast of Okinawa, right here by the Ryukyu Islands. And so the Ryukyu Islands were actually captured. So now we have Okinawa from both sides. It was the last stand before the Americans can now reach the mainland Japan. And then Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, he wanted to continue his battle of attrition with the Allies. And so he wanted to take out as many U.S. soldiers as possible to make them reconsider fighting anymore. So he built hidden dugouts. He built just like a tunnel system. And so he laid waiting for the U.S. to come along. So he waited. Admiral Spruance, 5th Fleet, and then Mark Mitcher's Task Force 58 used about 1,500 ships and then combined force of 350,000 people. And so on the 1st was called the Typhoon of Steel. So it was described as a shore bombardment that was just, you can literally, the place was blacked out. There was so much artillery hitting this island. And so it was so violent that Spruance messaged Nimitz, and he was like, I may be crazy, but I think the Japanese have quit the war. But Nimitz, he knew better. He was like, delete everything after crazy. Because they didn't quit the war. They're just crazy. And so the U.S. landed on the shores and they captured territory without firing a shot. They're moving along. They don't know what's going on. It's quiet. It's oddly quiet. And so the 6 Marines, they end up moving north and they captured the northern sector with like 1,000 of them becoming casualties. So by this point, everything just erupts. It seemed like even trees were opening fire. Everyone was being laid out. The army moved south, and then they ended up going against the Michinado line. And then they faced continuous counterattack after counterattack after counterattack on every ridge, cavern, cave, tunnel, everything. This was like a slow attrition and constant attacks that happened. And so this, over the course of the period that they were trying to capture this island, weighed heavily morally on, or yeah, morality on, yeah, on the morals of the troops themselves. So Nimitz grew concerned over the cost of this attack as the days went on without much any progress at all. And so over the course of this, also with the kamikaze attacks, about 175 ships ended up being casualties off the coast. And so, well, sorry, 175 sailors on these ships ended up being casualties of the war and everything. And so, well, 40%, sorry, 40% of the casualties were sailors, 175 ships were attacked and destroyed. And so, FDR at the time, it was like April 12th, it was kind of like in the middle of this. April 12th comes along, FDR sitting for a picture, and then he suddenly collapsed. And later on, it turns out that he was actually battling severe fatigue, illness from hypertension, congestive heart failure, and then like small TIAs or transient ischemic attacks. And then he possibly had a malignant tumor. And then he also had polio. And so over the course of all that, about 1 p.m. Is when he sat for his painting. FDR had a headache, and then he started having chills the entire morning, just kind of like feeling sick and everything. He suddenly just dropped his cigarette, and then he just kind of like slumped forward. The artist asked if he was okay, and then FDR replied, "I have a terrific pain in the back of my head. I don't know what's going on." And then he went unconscious, and he fell to the ground, and then he ended up dying at 63 years old of a cerebral hemorrhage. The last words he had was to his personal artist. And so Harry Truman, he ends up taking over as president, and the same day he conducts the rest of the war. And so bad weather ended up coming over, on Okinawa. Trucks became stuck. The dead were kind of unearthed. There's like maggots and like fleas and insects and everything, and then skeletons everywhere. And so the stench was repulsive. It was horrendous on this island. And then fatigue set in. And then it was just the heat, with the humidity was massive. And so by the time this was all said and done, 150,000 Okinawans were killed, and then about 250,000 total people ended up dying on that island. And essentially part of them were made up of children and families. And so finally, and then most of them actually committed harakiri, or ritual suicide, because they knew this island was being taken. They were not going to surrender. And so ultimately the island ended up being taken. And so now comes to the summer. And so by this whole time, the Manhattan Project, conducted by Oppenheimer, and essentially at the same time, Germany was kind of like going over physics and kind of figuring out this way to produce the ultimate weapon. And so, it was under the notion that they could use this to come up with a weapon. And so it was information about this was sent over, and now we had students who were practicing, or we had German lecturers coming over and practicing with students, or teaching students about quantum physics and stuff like that, and going back over. But during the war, now that we had that information, now we had the information to develop this idea that we could use nuclear energy or atomic energy to essentially create a massive bomb that could essentially be a sun that's on Earth. And so they came up with a selection of, so because Germany was now knocked out of the war, they had to use something to capitulate the Japanese into surrendering. So then that's when we came up with the atomic bomb. And so a select number of cities were came up with, and so by June 22nd, Emperor Hirohito he attempts to talk to Russian diplomats over a possible peace. Russia was like, "Screw you guys," so they didn't even respond. And so then talks of what to do with Japan end up happening because of the Okinawa campaign was too costly. And so they had three options. Operation Downfall was pretty much the invasion of mainland Japan, but it was essentially estimated that about 10 million people or Japanese people will die. And then there was Operation Olympic with the invasion of Kyushu in November of 1945. That'll be the start of it. 750,000 men would invade Kyushu with an estimated 270,000 casualties. Next would be Operation Coronet with the invasion of Honshu in March of 1946 with an estimated 1.1 million people with an estimated 90,000 casualties. And so that was essentially going to be what Operation Downfall suggested. And so I'm going to write this out. Oh, sorry. So I'm going to put it like this. Downfall. So Kyushu, yeah. Then so Kyushu and then Honshu. And so there you go, you got it? Yeah, you got it. And so there's that. And now May through August, Japan ended up instructing children and civilians how to arm themselves, how to create bunkers, how to use weapons, trench emplacements, and stuff like that. They started training their own civilians. 3 million would then be used to reinforce Kyushu, and then the remaining Japanese people will then be used to reinforce the mainland of Honshu. A naval block. So then the next option will be a naval blockade. There you go. So then the next one was a naval blockade. So Nimitz actually wanted to do this as well, to cut off all resources to Japan and pretty much to starve them out. MacArthur, on the other hand, planned to invade them after they end up just starving them out. And so Truman, in July, though, he ends up hearing about the first successful atomic bomb test. And so he's like, wait a minute, we have a third option. So Truman meets at the Potsdam Conference between America, Britain, and Russia. And so Truman ends up saying that, hey, we have a secret weapon we can do, or we can use. And so he kind of like opens his mouth a little bit about this. He kind of like, spreads the wealth. And so then July 25th, Truman approves the use of the atomic bomb. So that'll be the third option. With 3 B-29s to be used for 3 atomic bombings. And so the next day, so July 25th and then July 26th, the Allies ended up sending a one final notice for Japan to surrender. And so, um, it's called the Potsdam Declaration essentially, and essentially what they said is that they Japan should surrender or it will face sudden and utter destruction. Now, the 27th, Japan does not was not in favor of Emperor Hirohito's decision, and Hirohito actually by this time wanted to surrender, but he couldn't. The Japanese officials would not let him, and so Hirohito ended up just rejecting the declaration. And by August 6th, the first atomic bomb happened on Hiroshima. So, write this down. So Hiroshima was the first city to be bombed, and that was bombed by the Enola Gay, piloted by Paul Tibbett. And so he actually took off with Little Boy, which is a slender one, it was a gun type atomic bomb. And so the gun type atomic bomb is basically a mass of uranium is let go and shot through a cylinder into another to create a chain reaction. So basically they just imploded against each other. So then casualty rate around 150,000 people ended up dying in this one. And so atomic bomb number 2, well, August 9th, the boxcar ended up taken off by Charles W. Sweeney. Initially, it was usually supposed to be piloted by Frederick Bach, but Sweeney, he couldn't fly his B-29, so they had him fly boxcar instead. And so they were to conduct boxcar. So there we go. All right. So they used the Fat Man, which was a plutonium implosion type. And so essentially, it was a series of massive explosives that surrounded the plutonium charge, or the uranium. And so when it detonated, the pressure pushed in towards the uranium altogether. And essentially it caused this large mass of buildup. And then it would go out like that. And so it detonated actually about 400 meters above the air. So it was a bit short. And so then about 80,000 people ended up dying in that one. At Nagasaki Center. All right. And so by this time, Hirohito calls for an imperial conference. He's done. He's tired. He's over with. And so the high officials, they understand that he'll call for surrender. And so they're like, nah, we're not doing that. So then they plan a coup to prevent that surrender. So on the 10th, the emperor is like, hey, I'm surrendering. This is it. This is final. On the 14th, Japan unconditionally surrenders after he is kept against surrendering for like 4 days. So essentially, they unconditionally surrender through a public announcement by Hirohito that was actually recorded. So then this was the first time actually that the public after actually heard his voice. And then it was so by the time that the coup was carried out, it was already too late. It was already broadcasted and sent out. So then, hold on, I got another special surprise. So this essentially is, well, this was the first battleship I ever built. So here you go. So this is the USS Missouri. And so this is painted, and I have the flags of all the Allied nations and stuff like that. Well, some of them fell off, and we got a few right there too. But this is essentially what the Missouri looked like on the day of the Japanese surrender on September 2nd in Tokyo Bay. And so, I'm going to lay that right there. But, yeah, so in Tokyo Bay, USS Missouri and hundreds of other ships were there, and World War II ends with that. And so MacArthur ends up putting the Japan under martial law for the moment until they get them back on their feet. Where is my eraser? And actually on board New Zealand. Shoot. So there was a small mishap. Actually, it's a fun little fun fact for anyone who likes fun facts. But during the signing, I'm gonna try to see if I can find it. So essentially, surrender document. There we go. Let's see if I can write it out. No. Where is it? Pretty sure it's Australia. No, it was French. Oh, they don't have it. Mistake. Surrender mistake. There you go. Ah, gotcha. All right. So this is how it is. So, yeah, France, Netherlands, New Zealand. Okay. New Zealand. Oh, Netherlands. Netherlands. New Zealand. All right. So, here we go. Basically, little tidbit. So the surrender document that Japan had to sign, ending the war and everything, all of the Allied nations had to sign it as well. And so, of course, the U.S. did first, China, UK, Australia. And then France, Netherlands, and New Zealand had to. Well, one nation messed up. Canada. So Canada was supposed to sign on the line right there, what following with France, Netherlands, and New Zealand. So right here, here, and here. Well, the French leader at the time had bad eyesight. So essentially, what happened was that he didn't sign here. He signed here, or sorry, Canadian leader didn't sign up above. He signed below the line. His eyesight was completely off. So then, oh my gosh, I guess this marker's going bad too. Ugh. So there we go. Yeah. There you go. So Canada ended up signing there. Well, it's not on the line, so technically it voided the whole document, and then the war would not have ended at that time. So what France did was cross it out. They wrote it there, and then Netherlands crossed it out, wrote it down there. No, New Zealand actually wrote crossed it out, wrote it down there. Actually, no, it was the U.S. So I believe the U.S. took the document back, and they just crossed it out, and they're like, "All right, fix it. Now it's done." And so, yeah, it's a cool little tidbit that had the Japanese emperor had he was actually no, it was yeah, I believe it was Emperor Hirohito. He was completely confused. He's like, "Well, what's going on?" And so that's what kind of happened. So had they not fixed Canada's signature and replaced it with set with their own lines below, then essentially the war would not have ended with most of those countries. And so now it's a fun little tidbit that out of this whole entire thing at the very end, when at this surrendering ceremony, it was kind of funny that Canada sided below the line because their eyesight was kind of bad. But yeah, so no, that's not the complete story, but it is most of the story of World War II. I know I definitely sped through some of it because it's so in depth. There's so many more battles, so many more heartfelt moments, so many other places and people that I haven't gotten to today or before as well. And so I know in the coming weeks I'm going to do another lecture on genocide and the Waffen SS. And so kind of raise awareness about that. I'm also going to do one on artifacts that I have. So then just kind of like wrap everything up, and then I'll put some stuff out there about the Tuskegee Airmen and then African American soldiers in the war as well. And so there's just a lot. There's so much, and so I wish I can have just a dedicated class on World War II just to show you guys how much stuff that was a part of this war. But essentially, this was the war to end all wars. Like there were so many people that ended up passing away in the millions, tens of millions, that this was the most costly war in modern day history. And so to be able to explain everything would take weeks, months to get through everything because there's so much stuff that happened, so many technological advances, so many changes in weaponry, aircraft, shipbuilding, bombs essentially, and like socio political changes as well. And so it's a lot. It is a lot. And so hopefully I did it some justice. It is hard to remember everything, essentially because this is still the second year that I have done this, and so most of the time I spend my time reading books, watching documentaries, reading articles and stuff like that. So I have a lot of like smaller facts in here and there, and so I can definitely talk about. I definitely recognize and talk about the battles and stuff like that, but there was so much. So I'm still kind of like getting the gist of it, but essentially, yeah, that was the basic gist of everything. So now this next go around, I'm going to do 50s and 60s, 70s, 80s, 80s, 90s. So we only have like 3 more weeks worth of lecture, and then that is it. So I'm going to get through everything. So essentially, you guys will have all the information at your disposal by the time of the final. So Otherwise, that is it for me. If you don't have any questions, I'm gonna get going because I have work in like 6 hours, and so yeah, I'll get this uploaded for you guys, and then yeah, I'll come up with the next lecture and let you know, guys know, and keep you posted over the course of the week. So as hopefully anyone. Oh, also a couple more things actually. Little fun fact here and there. Oh shoot, I just lost my train of thought. Well, if I remember, I'll put in the announcements. Wow, I just completely lost my train of thought. Oh well. Hmm. Yeah. No. That's crazy. Oh well. Yeah. You guys take care, and then have a good St. Patty's Day as well. Stay safe out there, and just have fun, really. And so just get out there and enjoy. I believe it's supposed to be a nice day out that day, so definitely just enjoy it. Make the most of it. All right. Take care.